What if everything you thought you knew about Elon Musk was just the beginning? The world had always seen him as a visionary, a man who reshaped industries from electric cars to space travel, but no one could have predicted the bombshell he was about to drop on a packed auditorium in Silicon Valley. The air was electric with anticipation as reporters, investors, and tech enthusiasts gathered, whispering rumors about what Musk might reveal next. Among them stood Emily Carter, a tech journalist known for her relentless pursuit of the truth, her skepticism tempered by a deep curiosity. Emily's phone buzzed with notifications, and she glanced at the screen with a mix of excitement and dread. The opening words of Musk's speech pierced the hum of the crowd. "Today, I unveil the project that will redefine humanity's future." A hush fell over the audience. Musk's eyes gleamed with the certainty of a man who believed he was standing on the brink of history. Emily's fingers tightened around her recorder. This wasn't just another product launch or space mission, this was something bigger, something almost unimaginable. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" she muttered under her breath, thinking about the millions who would soon hear this news. Musk spoke of a technology that would merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence, a project so ambitious that it promised to solve the biggest crises facing humanity: climate change, disease, and even mortality itself. The crowd erupted into a mixture of awe and disbelief. Emily's mind raced. How could she capture this moment? How could she understand the implications fully? As she scribbled notes, a strange feeling settled in her chest, a mixture of hope and unease. The questions began: could this really work? Was it ethical? What did it mean for humanity's future? For Emily, the story had just begun. Emily Carter had always been a fighter, shaped by a childhood where love was scarce and expectations were high. Born in a small town outside of Denver, Colorado, she was the eldest of 3 siblings, raised mostly by her mother after her father left when Emily was just 8 years old. The memories of her father's departure were a tangled web of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. He was a brilliant man, a software engineer with dreams bigger than the town could hold, but his dreams didn't include staying with his family. Emily's mother, a schoolteacher with quiet strength, worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and make sure her children never went to bed hungry. From a young age, Emily learned to rely on herself, to push through setbacks, and to chase after what she wanted no matter the obstacles. Her escape was books and technology. She devoured every story she could find about inventors, pioneers, and innovators. She dreamed of writing about them, telling their stories to the world, proving that she could belong in the fast-paced, male-dominated tech world. Yet beneath her determination was a gnawing insecurity. Emily often felt like an outsider, the girl from a broken home trying to prove she was more than her past. She carried a deep fear of failure, one that sometimes paralyzed her when the pressure mounted. It was this fear that made her push herself harder, often at the expense of her own happiness. In college, Emily studied journalism and computer science, a combination that baffled some but made perfect sense to her. She wanted to understand the technology deeply, to report on it honestly, to hold those in power accountable. She found a mentor in Professor Jack Reynolds, a grizzled veteran of tech reporting who saw in Emily the same fire that had driven him for decades. Jack taught her to dig deeper, to ask uncomfortable questions, and to never settle for the surface story. Outside of her work, Emily's closest relationship was with her best friend, Sarah. Sarah was the voice of reason and humor in Emily's life, always ready with a joke or a shoulder to lean on. Their friendship was a lifeline in the chaotic world of deadlines and exclusives. Despite these connections, Emily's relationship with her father remained strained and distant. She hadn't seen him in years, and every attempt to reconnect ended in disappointment. The unresolved pain fueled much of Emily's drive to succeed, to prove she could build something meaningful without him. This internal conflict often surfaced in subtle ways, moments of vulnerability she hid behind a tough exterior, a tendency to push people away when things got too close. As Emily prepared for her coverage of Musk's announcement, all these pieces of her past converged. She saw in Musk a reflection of her own complicated ambitions, a man unafraid to dream big but shadowed by controversy and risk. Yet unlike Musk, Emily wrestled with self-doubt constantly, making her question if she was ready for the story she was about to chase. This was more than just a scoop, it was a test of who she was. As the sun set over the city, Emily sat in her small apartment, surrounded by screens displaying snippets of Musk's live announcement, public reactions, and cryptic leaks from anonymous sources. Her heart beat faster with anticipation and fear. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, this story could change everything. And so could she. Emily's mornings had never been routine, but since Elon Musk's announcement, every day felt like running on a fragile wire stretched tight over an abyss. The buzz of her phone was relentless, messages from editors, tips from sources, heated debates on social media. Her editor, Mark, was breathing down her neck, pushing for an exclusive, a headline that would shake the industry. "Emily, I need more than speculation. Get me something concrete or I'll have to assign this to someone else," he texted, sharp and impatient. The pressure wasn't new, but this story carried a weight she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just about breaking news anymore, it was about uncovering something that could alter the course of humanity. She spent hours piecing together fragments from leaks, obscure patents, and anonymous sources claiming to have inside knowledge. The deeper she dug, the murkier the truth became. The project Musk hinted at was unlike anything the tech world had seen, a hybrid of artificial intelligence and human consciousness, a project codenamed Nexus. Rumors whispered that it involved advanced neural implants capable of linking the human brain directly with AI networks. Emily's mind raced with the implications. If true, it could revolutionize medicine, education, even what it meant to be human. Yet questions overwhelmed her. Who was funding this? How far along was the project? And most importantly, what were the risks? Emily knew the importance of skepticism, especially with stories this big. Past headlines had been filled with promises that never materialized, with technologies hyped beyond reality. She had learned the hard way not to get swept up in hype. Her closest friends urged caution, worried she was chasing a ghost. Sarah messaged her one night, "Be careful, Em. This sounds bigger than any story you've done. Don't lose yourself in it." But Emily couldn't stop. Every lead, every whisper pulled her deeper. Then came the first breakthrough, an invitation. A cryptic email from someone claiming to be a lead engineer on Musk's project, offering a chance to talk off the record. Emily's heart pounded as she replied, careful not to reveal too much. They arranged a meeting at a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. The engineer, a woman named Dr. Lila Morgan, was cautious but spoke with the quiet intensity of someone who believed in the mission. She described the project as a last-ditch effort to save humanity from itself, a merging of man and machine to overcome physical and mental limits. "It's more than technology," Lila said, eyes bright with conviction. "It's about evolution." Emily jotted down notes, her skepticism battling with a flicker of hope. After the meeting, doubts crept in again. Could this woman be trusted? Was this the whole story or just a carefully crafted narrative? Meanwhile, tensions at work mounted. Mark pushed for sensational angles, urging Emily to speculate on wild conspiracies and hidden agendas. "People want drama," he insisted. "Give it to them." But Emily resisted. She wanted to tell the truth, even if it was complicated. The story began to strain her relationships outside work too. Her mother worried about her obsession, her brother barely recognized the sister who had become consumed by deadlines and secrets. Yet in the middle of the chaos, Emily found moments of clarity. A late-night call with Sarah helped ground her, reminding her of the person she wanted to be, honest, fearless, compassionate. One night, as she reviewed leaked documents and pieced together timelines, a message popped up on her screen from an anonymous source claiming to have data files related to Nexus. The risk of opening unknown files was high, but Emily's curiosity won. The files contained technical schematics, research notes, and experimental data hinting at breakthroughs, and failures. Some documents described neural interfaces that caused unintended side effects, from memory loss to emotional instability. Others suggested the project was years behind schedule. This wasn't a smooth ride, it was a perilous journey with human lives at stake. Emily realized she wasn't just reporting on a tech story, she was uncovering a drama of ambition, risk, and hope. As she sifted through the data, her phone buzzed again with a message from Mark: "This could blow up. Be ready." That night, Emily lay awake, her mind swirling with questions and possibilities. The story was bigger than she had imagined, a tangled web of technology, ethics, and human emotion. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but something deep inside told her this was the story she was meant to tell. The first clues had been found, but the journey was just beginning. Emily had expected secrecy, but nothing prepared her for the moment she stepped inside the glass-walled building nestled in a quiet industrial park just outside San Francisco. The sleek, futuristic lobby gleamed under soft LED lights, every detail meticulously designed to impress yet conceal. A sign simply read, "Nexus Project, authorized personnel only." Her heart pounded as a security guard scanned her credentials and waved her through. She was finally here, inside Elon Musk's most guarded secret. The air was cool and sterile, humming with the quiet energy of hidden machines. Emily was led down long corridors, past locked labs and buzzing server rooms. The scent of ozone and electronics filled the air. She tried to keep her nerves in check, reminding herself she was here as a journalist, not a spy. Finally, she arrived in a large room bathed in soft blue light, where a group of engineers and scientists huddled around glowing screens. At the center was Elon Musk himself, unmistakable in his casual black shirt and intense gaze. "Emily Carter," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome. We've been expecting you." The room fell silent as Musk began to explain the Nexus project in detail. Unlike the public announcement, this presentation was technical, layered with jargon and complex concepts. The goal was staggering: to create a direct neural interface that could seamlessly integrate human consciousness with artificial intelligence, enabling people to access knowledge and communicate in ways never before imagined. Musk spoke of solving neurological diseases, enhancing cognitive abilities, and even extending life expectancy. Emily listened, fascinated but cautious. The potential benefits were enormous, but the risks were equally daunting. She noticed a prototype device resting on the table, a sleek, wearable implant designed to be inserted at the base of the skull. Musk described rigorous safety protocols and extensive testing, but Emily's reporter instincts told her to look deeper. After the presentation, Emily was given a private tour. She passed through rows of cutting-edge equipment, brain scanners, AI simulation chambers, and biometric monitors. Scientists moved with purpose, their faces a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Emily asked questions, probing for answers about side effects, ethical concerns, and transparency. Some answered openly, others were more guarded. One young engineer, a woman named Kara, shared a glimpse of the human side of the project. She talked about her brother, who suffered from a degenerative neurological disorder, and how Nexus represented a chance to give him hope. Emily felt a lump in her throat. The technology wasn't just a cold experiment, it was deeply personal to those involved. Yet, not all was perfect behind the scenes. Emily sensed undercurrents of tension, arguments whispered in hallways, hurried meetings behind closed doors. She caught glimpses of frustration on the faces of the research team, a subtle but persistent anxiety. It became clear the project was pushing boundaries in ways that made some uneasy. Later that evening, Emily sat alone in a small conference room, reviewing her notes and recording interviews. Her mind spun with conflicting emotions: admiration for the vision, concern for the risks, and curiosity about the untold stories lurking beneath the surface. The next day, she was invited to meet with Dr. Lila Morgan again. This time, Lila was more candid, speaking about the project's darker moments, the failed trials, unexpected side effects, and the immense pressure to deliver results quickly. "We're racing against time," Lila said. "Every day we delay could mean losing the chance to save millions." Emily pressed her about the ethical lines being crossed, but Lila only shrugged. "Progress always comes with sacrifices." The words hung heavily in the air. Emily realized the story wasn't just about technology, it was about humanity's desperate gamble with its own future. That night, as she walked out into the cool California air, Emily's thoughts churned. She had seen the future, but it was both dazzling and terrifying. She wondered what she would do with this knowledge, how to tell a story that balanced hope with caution, excitement with responsibility. The Nexus project was no longer just a headline, it was a journey into the unknown, and Emily was determined to follow it wherever it led. Emily's next encounter with the Nexus project was unexpected and profoundly personal. During a late afternoon visit to the research facility, she was introduced to Dr. Marcus Hayes, the project's lead neural engineer. Marcus was in his early 40s, with sharp features softened by a warm smile and eyes that seemed to carry both the burden of responsibility and an unyielding hope. His hands, stained with ink and grease from prototype schematics, told the story of someone deeply invested in the project's success. They met in a quiet corner of the lab, away from the buzz of machines and hurried conversations. Marcus spoke candidly about the challenges they faced, technical setbacks, ethical dilemmas, and the weight of public scrutiny. But what struck Emily most was his unwavering belief in the mission. "I see this project as a bridge," Marcus said quietly. "A way to connect the best parts of humanity with the power of technology. It's about healing, about transcending our limits." As they talked, Emily found herself letting down her guard, sharing parts of her own story, her father's abandonment, the fear of never measuring up, and the hunger to make a difference. Marcus listened without judgment, nodding in understanding. For the first time, Emily felt truly seen in this whirlwind of technology and ambition. Yet, just as hope blossomed, tension surged. A close colleague of Marcus's, Dr. Rachel Chen, had warned Emily in a hushed conversation about internal conflicts within the team. Rachel suspected that some members were pushing ethical boundaries too far in the race for results, risking harm to test subjects and public trust. Emily's heart sank. The line between hope and danger was razor-thin. Then came the unexpected climax. During a routine briefing, a confidential report was leaked to Emily. It revealed an experimental trial where participants had suffered severe neurological side effects. Memory lapses, emotional instability, and, in one case, permanent cognitive impairment. The revelation rocked Emily's world. She struggled to reconcile the optimistic vision Marcus painted with the harsh realities hidden behind closed doors. When she confronted Marcus, his expression was a mix of sorrow and determination. "We knew the risks," he said, voice heavy. "But progress demands sacrifice. We're learning, adjusting. This is how breakthroughs happen." Despite the setback, Emily found hope again in Marcus's unwavering commitment to transparency and improvement. She realized the project was a living, breathing thing, imperfect but evolving. The next days were a roller coaster. Emily balanced interviews, confidential meetings, and late-night fact-checking. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, to tell the story honestly, to protect those at risk, and to shed light on the ethical complexities. One evening, after a long day, Sarah called. "You sound exhausted." "Don't forget to breathe," she said gently. Emily smiled, grateful for the reminder. It's hard not to get lost in it all. As the chapter of this personal connection closed, Emily knew the path ahead would be anything but easy. The story was no longer just about a tech revolution, it was about real people, real struggles, and the fragile balance between hope and heartbreak. When Elon Musk's announcement of the Nexus project first went viral, the world reacted in waves of shock, awe, and skepticism. Social media exploded with hashtags like #NexusFuture, #MindMerge, and #HumanAI Revolution trending across platforms. Emily watched as opinions polarized sharply. Some hailed Musk as a visionary on the brink of solving humanity's greatest challenges, while others warned of a dystopian nightmare where human identity could be erased or controlled by machines. Late-night talk shows debated the ethics and feasibility. Panelists argued over whether the project was a leap forward or a reckless gamble. On one extreme, futurists painted vibrant pictures of a world where disease and aging would be cured, education would be instantaneous, and communication would transcend language barriers. On the other, ethicists and philosophers warned that merging AI with human consciousness risks stripping away free will, privacy, and even what it meant to be human. Emily found herself caught in the middle, tasked with capturing this cacophony of voices with fairness and depth. Her articles sparked passionate responses. Readers from all walks of life shared their fears and hopes, their excitement and doubts. She received messages from families affected by neurological diseases, hoping Nexus would be their cure. Others wrote of their worries about government surveillance and corporate control. One letter from a man named David stood out. He described his wife's battle with Alzheimer's and how Nexus offered a glimmer of hope for restoring her fading memories. The letter was heartfelt, a raw reminder of the human stakes beneath the tech headlines. Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. Competitors in the tech world launched counter-narratives, some accusing Musk of hype and others warning of unintended consequences. Regulators began asking tough questions about safety protocols and ethical guidelines. Emily found herself attending panels and conferences where these debates unfolded in real time. She interviewed AI experts, neuroscientists, ethicists, and patient advocates, weaving their perspectives into her reporting. Amid the public discourse, fear and hope clashed daily. Online forums buzzed with conspiracy theories ranging from mind control to government plots, while grassroots groups formed to advocate for transparency and ethical oversight. Emily observed how the narrative was shaping not just public opinion but the project's trajectory itself. Musk and his team were pressured to be more transparent, to release more data, and to engage with the public's concerns. The company's PR efforts ramped up, carefully crafted messages emphasizing safety, consent, and the transformative potential of Nexus. But beneath the polished exterior, Emily sensed unresolved tensions. Whispers of internal disagreements and rushed timelines persisted. The project was no longer a private endeavor, it was a global conversation, one that would shape policy, technology, and culture for years to come. Emily felt the weight of being a storyteller in this historic moment. Every article she wrote had the power to inform, to challenge, to inspire. She knew that how the public perceived Nexus could determine its fate. Late one night, reviewing reader comments and messages, Emily paused at a question repeatedly asked by her audience: what happens if it all goes wrong? That question echoed in her mind as she prepared for the next phase of her investigation. The story was growing bigger, more complex, and deeply human. Emily realized that telling it was not just about breaking news but about capturing the hopes, fears, and dreams of a world standing on the edge of a new era. As the public debate over the Nexus project swelled, Emily found herself drawn into the shadowy corners of the story, where uncertainty, fear, and conflicting interests tangled in ways she hadn't anticipated. Despite the glossy presentations and optimistic headlines, whispers of trouble began to surface. Late one evening, Emily received an encrypted message from an anonymous source claiming to be a former Nexus employee. The message hinted at cover-ups and suppressed data, warning that not all was as transparent as Musk's team suggested. Intrigued and cautious, Emily began to dig deeper. She reached out to her network of contacts, quietly probing for corroboration. Slowly, pieces started to emerge. Testimonies of employees pressured to downplay side effects, reports of rushed trials with incomplete data, and internal memos suggesting ethical concerns were often overridden by the urgency to meet deadlines. The more Emily uncovered, the more she felt the story fracturing into opposing narratives: on one hand, a groundbreaking project with potential to change lives, on the other, a risky gamble with hidden costs. One source, a scientist who asked to remain unnamed, revealed a disturbing incident where a volunteer experienced severe neurological damage during a trial but was quickly withdrawn from records. They wanted to keep it quiet, the scientist whispered. The PR team was terrified of the fallout. Emily wrestled with the weight of these revelations. Publishing them without solid proof could jeopardize her career and the lives of those involved. But ignoring them felt like a betrayal of her duty as a journalist. She sought advice from Professor Jack Reynolds, her mentor, who reminded her of the importance of integrity and perseverance. Truth isn't always neat, he said. It's messy, complicated. But it's worth chasing. At the same time, Emily noticed increasing pressure from her editor, Mark, who grew restless for sensational headlines to boost readership. This story needs a punch, he insisted. Something that grabs attention and shakes the tech world. Emily resisted. She wanted depth, nuance, not just clickbait. The tension between journalistic rigor and media hype became a daily struggle. As the investigation unfolded, Emily's own doubts crept in. Could she trust her sources? Was she being manipulated by agendas unknown? The line between fact and rumor blurred. To make matters worse, she began receiving veiled threats, anonymous emails warning her to stop digging or face consequences. The warnings were subtle but chilling. Despite this, Emily pushed forward. She arranged a clandestine meeting with the anonymous whistleblower, a former lab technician named Aaron. In a dimly lit cafe, Aaron shared his story, long hours, mounting stress, and a growing sense that the project's ambition outpaced its ethics. We were told the risks were worth it, he said, voice low. But some of us couldn't ignore the costs. Emily felt a surge of empathy. These were not villains but people caught in a storm of innovation and pressure. Back at her apartment, Emily pored over documents Aaron had provided, internal emails, medical reports, and test logs. The evidence was powerful but incomplete. She knew exposing the truth would ignite controversy, possibly backlash. As the story deepened, Emily also grappled with her personal life. The obsession with Nexus had strained her friendships and family ties. Sarah confronted her gently, "You're carrying the world on your shoulders, Em. Don't lose yourself." Emily nodded but felt torn. This story was bigger than anything she had ever faced. It was a turning point, for the project, for her career, and for her understanding of the thin line between hope and hubris. One night, after a particularly long day, Emily sat in the dark, staring at her laptop screen filled with notes and emails. The shadows of doubt loomed large, but so did her resolve. She knew the next step could change everything. The truth was out there, tangled in complexity and risk. It was her job to find it, and to tell it. The days following Emily's meeting with Aaron, the former lab technician, marked a turning point in her investigation. Armed with the documents he had shared, she began drafting a comprehensive exposé detailing the dangers hidden beneath the sleek surface of the Nexus project. The report included disturbing accounts of volunteers suffering severe side effects, from memory loss to emotional instability, incidents that Musk's team had downplayed or, worse, tried to conceal. Emily felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. Publishing this story could dismantle the public's trust in Nexus and jeopardize the project's future, but ignoring it felt like a betrayal to those harmed. She carefully cross-checked every piece of evidence, reached out to other whistleblowers, and sought expert opinions to verify the claims. The ethical stakes were enormous. Emily also faced an internal battle with Mark, her editor. He pushed for a sensational headline, a bombshell that would guarantee clicks and media attention. "Make it explosive, Emily. People want drama, not cautious nuance." She argued for balance and thoroughness, determined to avoid sensationalism that could distort the truth. The tension in the newsroom was palpable, and Emily knew this story could make or break her career. As she prepared to publish, Elon Musk made a public statement acknowledging the setbacks but reaffirming his commitment to the project's mission. He spoke of transparency, safety, and a brighter future, but his words rang hollow to some critics. The divide in public opinion deepened. That evening, Emily's phone buzzed with a new message, an encrypted email from an unknown sender. It contained video footage from inside the Nexus labs, showing a volunteer experiencing a severe reaction during a trial. The footage was raw, unedited, and deeply unsettling. Emily's pulse quickened. The video was undeniable evidence but raised new questions. How had this been allowed to happen? Who had authorized the trials? She shared the footage with a trusted neurologist, Dr. Helen Carter, who confirmed that the symptoms suggested serious neurological damage. Emily realized the story was about to explode in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Before releasing the report, Emily reached out once more to Marcus Hayes and Dr. Lila Morgan for comments. Marcus responded with measured concern, emphasizing ongoing improvements and the unpredictable nature of cutting-edge science. Lila, more emotional, expressed regret for the harm caused and a hope that lessons learned would guide future development. Emily wrestled with these responses, trying to give a voice to all sides while staying true to the facts. On the day of publication, the article went live. Headlines blared, "Inside Nexus, the hidden risks behind Musk's mind-merging dream." Social media erupted. The story was shared worldwide, sparking urgent discussions about regulation, ethics, and the pace of technological innovation. Emily received messages from supporters praising her courage and from critics accusing her of fearmongering. The tension reached a boiling point when Musk tweeted, calling the article misleading and irresponsible. The media frenzy intensified. Amid the chaos, Emily felt a mix of pride and apprehension. She had broken a story that mattered but knew the fallout was just beginning. That night, alone in her apartment, Emily reflected on the journey so far, the hopes, the doubts, the risks. She realized the story was no longer just about technology but about humanity's quest to push boundaries and the costs that came with it. The revelation had shaken the Nexus project to its core, but it also opened the door to necessary conversations about transparency, safety, and the future of human-machine integration. Emily knew the story was far from over, and her role as a chronicler of this groundbreaking moment was only just beginning. The morning after Emily's exposé hit the internet, the world awoke to a storm. Headlines blared across news outlets globally: Nexus project in crisis, Musk's dream marred by scandal, neural tech's dark side revealed. Social media platforms were flooded with a tidal wave of reactions, outrage, disbelief, support, and fear, all swirling in a chaotic digital whirlwind. Emily's inbox exploded with messages, some praising her bravery, others threatening legal action or worse. The Nexus team scrambled to respond, issuing carefully worded statements promising full investigations and recommitment to safety. Elon Musk, in his characteristic style, took to Twitter once again. This time, his tone was sharper, defensive, accusing the media of sensationalism and misinformation. "The future is always messy," he tweeted, "but giving up on progress is not an option." Internally, the Nexus project faced unprecedented pressure. Board members convened emergency meetings to assess damage control strategies. Investors worried about the public's confidence and potential regulatory backlash. Within the research facility, morale plummeted. Scientists who had devoted years to the project felt betrayed, some frustrated with the leak, others fearful for their careers. Emily, meanwhile, found herself at the center of the storm. Journalistic accolades were mixed with backlash. Her editor, Mark, finally acknowledged the story's impact but cautioned her about the personal toll. "This is bigger than you imagined," he warned. "Watch your back." The threats Emily had been receiving escalated: anonymous calls, suspicious packages, and shadowy figures near her apartment. Despite the fear, she remained steadfast, driven by a sense of purpose. One afternoon, Emily received an unexpected visit from Dr. Kara Lewis, the young engineer she had met months earlier. Kara looked worn but determined. "We need to talk," she said urgently. Kara revealed new information, internal documents showing that some test subjects had been coerced into trials without full consent, and that certain adverse effects had been deliberately minimized in reports. The revelation shocked Emily. It painted a darker picture of the Nexus project's inner workings and raised profound ethical questions. As Emily prepared to report on these new findings, she wrestled with her own feelings of betrayal. She had believed in the good intentions of many involved, but now faced a tangled web of ambition, desperation, and moral compromise. Public debate intensified. Governments worldwide debated imposing strict regulations or even halting neural interface research altogether. Advocacy groups demanded transparency and accountability. Meanwhile, a small but vocal faction of supporters continued to champion Nexus as the future of humanity, accusing critics of fearmongering and resisting progress. Through it all, Emily's voice became one of reason. Pushing for balanced discussion, careful oversight, and empathy for those affected. Her writing reflected the complexity of the situation, the hope mingled with heartbreak, and the urgent need for ethical reflection in a rapidly changing world. At home, the toll of the story weighed heavily on Emily. Sarah noticed the exhaustion etched into her friend's face and urged her to take a break. But Emily knew she couldn't stop now. She had uncovered a story that was rewriting the rules of science and society, and she was determined to see it through. One evening, as she sat in her dimly lit apartment reviewing her notes, Emily received a call that chilled her to the core. It was Marcus Hayes. His voice was strained. "Emily, you need to be careful. There are powerful forces at play. Not everyone wants the truth to come out." The warning underscored the stakes. This story was no longer just about technology. It was about power, control, and the fragile boundaries between innovation and exploitation. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battles ahead. The fallout from her revelations was far from over, and the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. But one thing was clear: the story of Nexus was changing the world, and she would be there to tell it. The pressure on Emily mounted as the Nexus fallout deepened. Every day brought new challenges, legal threats, public backlash, and a gnawing sense that she was becoming a target for forces far larger than herself. Her apartment felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage, each shadow a potential threat. Despite warnings from Marcus and her editor Mark, Emily refused to back down. She believed in the truth and its power to spark change. But the breaking point came unexpectedly. One morning, after a sleepless night spent reviewing sensitive documents, Emily received a visit that shook her to her core. Standing in the doorway was a man in a dark suit, his demeanor cold and professional. "Emily Carter?" he asked. She nodded, heart pounding. "We need to talk," he said. The man introduced himself as Agent Reynolds from a federal agency. He informed Emily that her investigation had attracted the attention of government officials concerned about national security and proprietary technology. "Certain information you possess could be classified," he warned. Emily felt a wave of fear mixed with indignation. She had always known the story carried risks, but this was another level entirely. The agent pressed her on sources and documents, suggesting she tread carefully. Over the following weeks, Emily was shadowed by unknown figures, her communications monitored. At work, the newsroom was tense. Mark urged her to scale back, warning that the pressure could compromise her safety and the paper's reputation. Yet, Emily's resolve hardened. She arranged a secret meeting with Marcus Hayes, hoping to understand the full scope of the project and its implications. In a secluded cafe, Marcus looked weary but candid. He admitted that some parts of Nexus had been rushed, driven by Musk's relentless timeline and investor pressure. He confessed to ethical compromises and a culture of silence that had silenced dissenting voices within the team. "We lost sight of what really mattered," Marcus said quietly. "The people we were supposed to help." Emily listened, realizing the story was no longer just about technology or corporate ambition. It was about human lives, moral responsibility, and the cost of unchecked progress. Fueled by this revelation, Emily dug deeper. She uncovered evidence that certain trial data had been manipulated to hide adverse effects, that volunteers had been inadequately informed, and that internal whistleblowers had been intimidated into silence. The stakes escalated when she received another anonymous tip, a planned large-scale human trial was set to launch imminently, potentially putting hundreds at risk. Racing against time, Emily prepared to expose the truth once more. The night before publication, she felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, "Remember why you started this. We're here for you." The next day, Emily's report ran across major platforms, detailing the impending trial and the ethical violations uncovered. The reaction was immediate and intense. Public outrage surged. Regulators launched investigations, and pressure mounted for a halt on all trials. Musk, confronted with the allegations, publicly promised reforms and a pause on testing. Yet, behind closed doors, tensions boiled. The Nexus team fractured, some pushing forward, others demanding accountability. Emily's life was irrevocably changed. She had crossed a line, becoming both a voice for the vulnerable and a lightning rod for controversy. Despite threats and setbacks, she felt a quiet pride. The breaking point had come. Not just for Nexus, but for her own journey as a journalist and a person committed to truth. As she looked out her window at the city skyline, Emily knew the story was far from over. The path ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to face it, armed with the conviction that stories like hers could shape the future. In the wake of the explosive report exposing the imminent human trials, Emily's world became a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and endless news cycles. The Nexus project had not only fractured publicly but internally, sparking a wave of resignations, debates, and power struggles. Yet amidst the chaos, Emily found herself reaching out to and receiving unexpected support from unlikely places. One such ally emerged in the form of Dr. Lila Morgan, the neuroscientist who had been both a part of Nexus and a vocal critic within the team. After months of silence, Lila contacted Emily through a secure channel, expressing her gratitude for the exposé and her own fears about the project's direction. "Emily," she wrote, "we've lost control. What began as a hopeful venture has become reckless. I want to help you tell the full story." Their first meeting was cautious but honest. Lila shared internal documents, detailed first-hand accounts of ethical breaches, and even introduced Emily to others who had quietly left Nexus in protest. Through Lila, Emily gained access to a network of whistleblowers and experts who were willing to speak out, many for the first time. This web of information deepened the narrative, revealing a pattern of systemic issues, pressure to meet deadlines at the expense of safety, suppression of dissent, and a culture that prioritized innovation over humanity. Meanwhile, Emily's relationship with Marcus Hayes grew more complex. Though he remained a staunch supporter of Musk's vision, Marcus admitted privately that the project's leadership had underestimated the human costs. "Elon's ambition is boundless," Marcus said one evening, "but sometimes that's a dangerous thing." Their conversations were often tense, balancing professional respect with fundamental disagreements. Emily realized that even those on the inside grappled with the ethical dilemmas posed by Nexus. Outside the scientific and corporate circles, Emily found allies in advocacy groups and patient communities. Families affected by neurological diseases rallied behind her reporting, seeing in Nexus both hope and heartbreak. Many shared stories of desperation, the lengths they would go for a chance at healing. These encounters humanized the abstract debate, reminding Emily that behind every statistic and tech breakthrough were real lives. As the public discourse evolved, regulatory bodies stepped up their involvement. Investigations were launched, and calls for strict oversight grew louder. Emily's articles often featured legal experts and ethicists, underscoring the complex balance between innovation and caution. At the same time, Elon Musk's public image shifted. He became more guarded in interviews, his usual bravado tempered by mounting scrutiny. Rumors circulated of internal conflicts and strategy shifts within his companies. Despite the mounting pressure, Musk remained a powerful figure, a symbol of both visionary progress and controversial recklessness. Emily's own life felt caught in this turbulent current. The threats and surveillance persisted, but so did the support from those who believed in her work. Sarah and her friends became her lifeline, providing moments of calm and grounding. One afternoon, after a long meeting with Lila and several whistleblowers, Emily felt the weight of it all. The story was bigger than she had imagined, filled with complexities and contradictions. Yet she also sensed a turning point. The tide of public opinion was shifting towards accountability and ethical reflection. She knew that stories like Nexus were not just about technology but about who we are as a society and how far we are willing to go. As the chapter of reckoning unfolded, Emily felt an unyielding determination to keep telling the story fully and fairly, to honor the voices of those impacted, and to help guide the conversation towards a future where progress did not come at the cost of humanity. The unexpected allies she found along the way were a reminder that even in the darkest moments, collaboration and courage could light a path forward. Emily's investigation had taken her from newsrooms to clandestine meetings, but nothing prepared her for what she encountered when she was granted rare access inside the Nexus laboratories. After weeks of persistent negotiation, and with the cautious approval of Dr. Lila Morgan, Emily was allowed a guided tour of the facility, a place that had become both a crucible of innovation and a chamber of secrets. Walking through the sleek, high-tech corridors, Emily felt the hum of machines and the buzz of servers, a stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface. The labs were state-of-the-art, filled with equipment that looked more like something out of a science fiction movie than a traditional research center. Engineers and scientists moved with purpose, eyes glued to monitors displaying complex neural data and brain scans. Lila led Emily to the heart of the operation, the neural interface testing room. Here, volunteers donned lightweight helmets embedded with sensors, their brain activity projected on large screens. Emily observed as a volunteer, a middle-aged man named David, interacted with a virtual environment controlled directly by his thoughts. It was mesmerizing, his movements were fluid, precise, and the connection between mind and machine seemed almost magical. But beneath the wonder, Emily couldn't ignore the undercurrent of unease. Lila pointed out areas where the technology was still raw, where glitches caused frustration or confusion for volunteers. She spoke candidly about the enormous challenges of decoding the brain's language, the unpredictable side effects, and the ethical tightrope they walked. "We're rewriting what it means to be human," Lila said softly. "But every breakthrough carries risks." Emily asked about the volunteers' experiences. Some reported profound moments of clarity and control, while others described headaches, memory lapses, or emotional disturbances. The risks were real, and the stakes high. As they moved through the facility, Emily noticed subtle signs of strain, a tense conversation between engineers, hurried whispers about data discrepancies, and locked doors behind which she was not permitted to enter. After the tour, Lila introduced Emily to Dr. Samuel Ortiz, the lead neurologist overseeing clinical trials. Samuel was guarded but professional, answering Emily's questions with carefully measured responses. When asked about the controversial incidents Emily had reported, he acknowledged the difficulties but emphasized the team's commitment to safety and transparency. "Science is a process," Samuel said. "Failures and setbacks are part of progress." Yet Emily sensed that beneath his calm exterior lurked frustration, pressure from leadership, public scrutiny, and the sheer complexity of the project. That evening, back in her apartment, Emily sifted through the notes and footage she had gathered. The experience inside the Nexus labs gave her a new perspective. This was not a simple story of villainy or heroism but a nuanced tale of ambition, ethics, and the human drive to transcend limitations. Emily's writing reflected this complexity, weaving vivid descriptions of the lab's futuristic atmosphere with the emotional realities faced by the team and volunteers. Her articles portrayed the scientists as deeply committed yet burdened by the moral questions their work raised. The public, too, began to respond with more empathy and curiosity. Readers asked thoughtful questions, debated fiercely in forums, and some shared their own hopes and fears about neural technology. For Emily, the tour marked a turning point, an understanding that the story she was telling was not just about technology or controversy, but about humanity grappling with its own evolution. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, determined to illuminate both the brilliance and the shadows within the Nexus project. As the story unfolded, the delicate balance between innovation and responsibility remained the central thread, a reminder that behind every great leap forward were real people, real struggles, and the profound question, how far should we go in rewriting the code of our minds? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The pressure inside the Nexus project was growing palpable as the scrutiny from the media, regulators, and the public intensified. Behind the sleek glass walls and futuristic machines, the cost of progress was beginning to reveal itself in ways no one could ignore. Emily's continued investigations uncovered stories of volunteers pushed beyond their limits, staff stretched thin by relentless demands, and the quiet toll on those who dared to dream of a new future. Among the voices Emily had come to know, one story stood out, that of Maya Collins, a former Nexus volunteer whose experience embodied both the hope and the heartbreak at the project's core. Maya, a vibrant woman in her early 30s, had volunteered with dreams of reclaiming her life after a traumatic brain injury left her with memory gaps and emotional numbness. The promise of Nexus technology had seemed like a lifeline, a chance to reconnect with the world in ways medicine hadn't offered. But what followed was a journey marked by unexpected complications. Maya described intense headaches, moments of confusion, and emotional swings that left her isolated and frightened. It was like waking up in a fog, she told Emily in a quiet voice. Some days, I couldn't tell if the thoughts were mine or the machine's. Her story resonated deeply with Emily, putting a human face on the abstract debate over technology and ethics. Emily documented Maya's struggles alongside expert insights from neurologists and ethicists who weighed the potential benefits against the risks. The narrative painted a complex picture. The incredible promise of neural interfaces was undeniable, but the human cost was real and sobering. Meanwhile, inside the Nexus labs, tension simmered. Scientists and engineers worked long hours, their passion mingled with exhaustion and anxiety. Some questioned the project's direction, worried that speed and competition were eclipsing safety and compassion. Others remained fiercely loyal to Musk's vision, convinced that the challenges were necessary growing pains on the path to a revolutionary breakthrough. The ethical dilemmas were omnipresent. Volunteers were encouraged to push through discomfort for the sake of data, dissenting voices were often sidelined. Emily learned of internal debates over transparency, with some advocating for full disclosure and others fearing that public panic could doom the project. The fractures within the team mirrored the wider societal struggle, how to balance innovation with responsibility, ambition with empathy. Emily's reporting captured these tensions, blending vivid descriptions of the high-tech environment with intimate portrayals of the people at its heart. Readers followed Maya's journey closely, her struggles sparking conversations about consent, risk, and the true meaning of progress. The public's fascination with Nexus evolved from awe to a more nuanced understanding. As the debate deepened, regulatory bodies imposed stricter oversight, demanding comprehensive safety protocols and independent reviews. Musk responded with a public commitment to ethical leadership, though critics questioned whether words alone could repair the damage. For Emily, the story had become a personal mission. She found herself reflecting on the very nature of progress, the sacrifices made in its name and the moral compass guiding it. Maya's story stayed with her, a poignant reminder that technology's future was inseparable from human experience. In quiet moments, Emily wondered what it meant to push boundaries responsibly, how to honor both innovation and humanity. The price of progress was steep, but the hope remained that through honesty, reflection, and courage, a better path could emerge. As she prepared her next piece, Emily felt the weight of her role. A chronicler of an era defined by extraordinary ambition and profound uncertainty, tasked with giving voice to both the promise and the peril of the machine age. Despite the public relations efforts and internal promises of reform, a growing shadow of doubt loomed over the Nexus project. Emily's investigation uncovered a troubling pattern: reports of data manipulation, silenced whistleblowers, and unexplained disappearances within the company's ranks. These revelations only deepened the complexity of the narrative she was unraveling. One evening, Emily received an encrypted message from an anonymous source claiming to be a former Nexus employee. The message contained a trove of confidential files and internal emails that painted a chilling picture of a corporate culture willing to sacrifice ethics for the sake of progress. Among the documents were emails discussing data adjustments to minimize adverse effects in trial reports, memos warning employees against unauthorized disclosures, and records of meetings where concerns were dismissed or downplayed. Emily knew that publishing such explosive material would elevate the story to new heights, and new dangers. She arranged a secret meeting with the source, who introduced themselves as Alex, a mid-level engineer who had grown disillusioned with Nexus's direction. Alex described a workplace rife with fear and coercion, where speaking out meant risking career destruction or worse. "They told us it was for the greater good," Alex said, voice low and tense, but it felt more like we were part of something dangerous. This new information raised critical questions about accountability and transparency. Emily's articles began to expose not only the technological risks but the systemic ethical failings within Nexus. Public trust wavered, and calls for independent investigations grew louder. Regulatory agencies launched formal probes, demanding access to internal records and personnel for interviews. Musk's response became increasingly guarded. His public appearances were less frequent, and when he did speak, his messages were carefully scripted, emphasizing innovation's importance but avoiding direct answers about the allegations. Meanwhile, Emily faced mounting pressure. Legal teams representing Nexus issued cease and desist letters, threatening lawsuits for defamation and breach of confidentiality. At times, her sources became unreachable, and she suspected intimidation tactics were at play. Yet, she remained resolute. The shadows of doubt that now surrounded Nexus were too important to ignore. She worked closely with legal counsel to protect herself and her sources, while carefully verifying every detail. The story ignited a broader societal debate about corporate power, scientific responsibility, and the limits of innovation. Ethicists, lawmakers, and citizens questioned how much control companies should have over technologies that affect human consciousness and identity. As Emily navigated the treacherous waters of this investigation, she reflected on the cost of truth. The personal risks, the professional challenges, and the emotional toll were immense. But the stakes, human lives, moral integrity, and the future of technology, were far too high to turn away. In late-night writing sessions, Emily poured herself into crafting narratives that were clear, compelling, and deeply human. She sought to illuminate the hidden shadows while honoring the complexities of those involved. Through it all, she found strength in the unexpected support of allies like Dr. Lila Morgan and Maya Collins, whose courage inspired her to press on. The shadow that had fallen over Nexus was not just a sign of failure but a call for accountability and change. Emily understood that the story she was telling was part of a larger reckoning, one that could reshape how society approaches the frontier of human enhancement and technology. As she prepared her next publication, she knew the truth would continue to provoke controversy, challenge assumptions, and push the conversation into new territory. The shadows of doubt were deep, but so was her commitment to bring them into the light. Emily sat in her small apartment late into the night, the soft glow of her laptop screen illuminating a weary but determined face. The Nexus story had evolved into something far beyond a simple expose. It had become a crucible testing her principles, her courage, and her resolve. The mounting pressure, from legal threats, public backlash, and the ever-looming danger to her sources, was relentless. But more than that, Emily faced an internal crossroads. How far was she willing to go to tell the truth? How much was she willing to sacrifice? The question haunted her as she scrolled through the latest batch of documents from Alex, the anonymous engineer. They revealed a plan to accelerate the next phase of human trials despite unresolved safety concerns and ongoing investigations. The ethical lines were blurred, and time was running out for potential victims. Emily knew that if the project proceeded unchecked, it could cause irreversible harm. But exposing it would bring consequences that might be personal, professional, and even physical. Her editor, Mark, urged caution. "Emily, you've already stirred the hornet's nest. You don't have to do this alone." Marcus Hayes, too, had offered support, though his conflicted stance made their conversations fraught with tension. Sarah and her friends, Emily's closest allies, reminded her to take care of herself. Yet Emily felt an urgency she couldn't ignore. The crossroads she faced was not just about a story, it was about what kind of person she wanted to be. The next morning, Emily reached out to Dr. Lila Morgan. Their meeting was a tense exchange of fears and hopes. Lila confessed that she had been pressured to stay silent but was now ready to speak openly, hoping that transparency might prevent further harm. With Lila's testimony and Alex's documents, Emily began crafting what she knew would be her most explosive article yet. The writing process was grueling. Every sentence was weighed carefully, every claim meticulously verified. The risks of legal retaliation and personal danger were real and immediate. As the publication date approached, Emily's circle tightened. She encrypted files, arranged secure communications, and prepared for the fallout. When the story finally went live, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Public outrage surged, advocacy groups mobilized, and government officials promised swift action. Musk, cornered by the revelations, issued a rare public apology and vowed to halt the trials indefinitely. Behind the scenes, however, the fallout was brutal. Nexus executives scrambled to contain the damage, and internal investigations exposed fractures and betrayals. Emily's role was both lauded and vilified. She had become a lightning rod in a storm of competing interests. As she watched the world react, Emily reflected on the crossroads she had faced. Choosing to speak out had come at a cost, but it had also opened a path toward accountability and hope. The story was far from over, but the moment marked a turning point, not just for Nexus, but for Emily herself. She had stepped into the light, embracing the power and responsibility of her voice. And no matter what came next, she was ready to face it. The fallout from Emily's explosive article swept through the tech world like a tidal wave, forcing Nexus to confront consequences it had long tried to avoid. Regulators launched comprehensive investigations, halting all human trials and demanding full transparency. Investors panicked, causing stock prices to plummet. Media outlets worldwide dissected every detail of the project's ethical lapses and operational failures. In the midst of this chaos, Emily found herself thrust into the spotlight. Her work was praised for bravery and tenacity but also attacked by powerful entities desperate to control the narrative. She received support from advocacy groups, scientific communities, and ordinary citizens, but also faced legal challenges and personal threats. The reckoning had begun, not just for Nexus, but for the entire industry of neural technology. Inside the walls of Nexus, tensions boiled over. Elon Musk, once unshakable, appeared visibly shaken. Public appearances became rare, and internal meetings grew contentious. Executives argued over damage control strategies, while scientists struggled with moral anguish over what had transpired under their watch. Lila Morgan emerged as a central figure in the reckoning. She testified before regulatory committees, detailing the internal pressures and ethical compromises she had witnessed. Her courage inspired others to come forward, creating a cascade of whistleblower accounts that deepened the investigation. Emily worked closely with Lila, helping to amplify these voices and ensure their stories were heard. The emotional toll on everyone involved was immense. Maya Collins, still recovering from her traumatic experience as a volunteer, spoke openly about the lasting impact on her life. Her story became a powerful symbol of the human cost behind the technology's promises. Through Emily's writing, Maya's voice reached thousands, sparking empathy and calls for reform. As the industry faced unprecedented scrutiny, lawmakers debated new regulations designed to safeguard human subjects and enforce ethical standards. The discussions were heated and complex, reflecting the delicate balance between fostering innovation and protecting humanity. Emily covered these debates, highlighting the voices of experts, advocates, and affected individuals. The reckoning extended beyond Nexus itself. Other companies developing similar technologies paused their projects to review safety measures and transparency policies. The era of unchecked ambition was giving way to a more cautious, reflective approach. Emily's role as a storyteller had evolved into that of a catalyst for change. Yet amidst the external storm, Emily grappled with her own internal reckoning. The relentless pace, threats, and emotional weight tested her resilience. She leaned on Sarah, Marcus, and her circle for support, finding solace in shared purpose and friendship. At the same time, she questioned what the future held, for herself, for the technology, and for society. One quiet evening, Emily visited a memorial event organized for volunteers affected by the Nexus trials. The room was filled with faces marked by courage and pain, people who had become unwitting pioneers in a high-stakes experiment. As she listened to their stories, Emily felt the profound responsibility of her work, to honor their experiences, to push for accountability, and to ensure that such sacrifices would not be in vain. The reckoning had begun, not just for Nexus, but for the entire industry of neural technology. Inside the walls of Nexus, tensions boiled over. Elon Musk, once unshakable, appeared visibly shaken. Public appearances became rare, and internal meetings grew contentious. Executives argued over damage control strategies, while scientists struggled with moral anguish over what had transpired under their watch. Lila Morgan emerged as a central figure in the reckoning. She testified before regulatory committees, detailing the internal pressures and ethical compromises she had witnessed. Her courage inspired others to come forward, creating a cascade of whistleblower accounts that deepened the investigation. Emily worked closely with Lila, helping to amplify these voices and ensure their stories were heard. The emotional toll on everyone involved was immense. Maya Collins, still recovering from her traumatic experience as a volunteer, spoke openly about the lasting impact on her life. Her story became a powerful symbol of the human cost behind the technology's promises. Through Emily's writing, Maya's voice reached thousands, sparking empathy and calls for reform. As the industry faced unprecedented scrutiny, lawmakers debated new regulations designed to safeguard human subjects and enforce ethical standards. The discussions were heated and complex, reflecting the delicate balance between fostering innovation and protecting humanity. Emily covered these debates, highlighting the voices of experts, advocates, and affected individuals. The reckoning extended beyond Nexus itself. Other companies developing similar technologies paused their projects to review safety measures and transparency policies. The era of unchecked ambition was giving way to a more cautious, reflective approach. Emily's role as a storyteller had evolved into that of a catalyst for change. Yet amidst the external storm, Emily grappled with her own internal reckoning. The relentless pace, threats, and emotional weight tested her resilience. She leaned on Sarah, Marcus, and her circle for support, finding solace in shared purpose and friendship. At the same time, she questioned what the future held, for herself, for the technology, and for society. One quiet evening, Emily visited a memorial event organized for volunteers affected by the Nexus trials. The room was filled with faces marked by courage and pain, people who had become unwitting pioneers in a high-stakes experiment. As she listened to their stories, Emily felt the profound responsibility of her work, to honor their experiences, to push for accountability, and to ensure that such sacrifices would not be in vain. Outside the scientific community, grassroots movements emerged advocating for digital rights, mental privacy, and informed consent. Emily covered these voices with care, acknowledging their vital role in shaping policy and public awareness. The narrative of neural technology became richer, more inclusive, and more accountable. Through her reporting, Emily found a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey, from the initial hook to the depths of scandal and now toward hopeful horizons, mirrored the larger story of human progress, fraught with risk, marked by struggle, yet propelled by the enduring spirit of innovation. As she drafted a series titled New Horizons, Ethics and Innovation in Neural Tech, Emily reflected on how far the story had come, and how far it still had to go. The past was a cautionary tale, the present a time of healing and rebuilding, and the future, a vast landscape of possibility waiting to be shaped with wisdom and care. Emily's voice, once that of a relentless investigator, now carried the nuance of a guide, helping readers navigate the complex terrain where technology met humanity. In this new chapter, the story was not about breaking limits at any cost, but about breaking through to a better understanding of what it meant to be human in an age of machines. The horizons ahead were wide and uncertain, but with transparency, ethics, and empathy, they held promise. And for Emily, that promise was enough to keep writing. Even as new horizons unfolded in the world of neural technology, the echoes of Nexus's troubled legacy reverberated powerfully. Emily found that the past was never truly behind them. It lingered in the memories of volunteers, in the debates of policymakers, and in the cautious steps of scientists seeking to rebuild trust. She dedicated her reporting to tracing these echoes, exploring how lessons from the past continued to shape the present and future. Emily's latest assignment took her back to the heart of the controversy, the city where many Nexus volunteers lived, including Maya Collins. The community bore the scars of the experiment, both visible and invisible. Families struggled with the aftermath of neurological damage, psychological trauma, and shattered hopes. Yet amid the pain, resilience blossomed. Emily spent days interviewing residents, capturing their stories with sensitivity and depth. She met with parents whose children had participated in early trials, volunteers now grappling with identity and memory issues, and local activists demanding accountability and reparations. The voices were raw and honest, a powerful counterpoint to the glossy promises of tech giants. One particularly moving encounter was with Sarah Mitchell, a volunteer who had lost her sense of self after the Nexus implant but found healing through community support and therapy. "It's like pieces of me were lost in the machine," Sarah said quietly, "but the love and care here helped me find new pieces, new meaning." Her story became a centerpiece of Emily's article, symbolizing both the cost and the courage born from the Nexus saga. At the same time, Emily examined how the echoes influenced regulatory frameworks. Policymakers cited Nexus repeatedly in discussions about neural interface legislation, emphasizing the need for strict ethical standards and enforceable protections. Emily attended hearings and roundtables, weaving insights from legal experts and scientists into her narrative. These echoes also stirred philosophical questions. Emily spoke with thinkers pondering the nature of identity in a world where minds could be augmented or altered. Was a person still themselves after interfacing with a machine? Could memories be trusted if they were shaped by technology? The Nexus story had sparked a profound re-examination of what it meant to be human. While the past's shadow remained long, it also illuminated paths forward. Emily chronicled grassroots healing initiatives, innovative therapies inspired by earlier failures, and new models of collaboration between scientists and communities. She saw that the Nexus experience, painful as it was, had ignited a movement toward more compassionate and conscientious science. For Emily personally, revisiting the echoes brought a mix of sorrow and hope. She remembered the early days of the investigation, the faces of those who had suffered, and the moments of doubt and fear. Yet she also felt the strength of the human spirit, its capacity to endure, adapt, and reclaim agency even after trauma. As she finalized her report, Emily wrote, "The echoes of the past are not just reminders of what went wrong. They are calls to listen, to learn, and to build a future where technology serves humanity without sacrifice." In these echoes, we find both warning and wisdom. Her work struck a chord with readers nationwide, sparking renewed dialogue about responsibility, healing, and the collective future of technology and society. The Nexus story was no longer just about a failed project, it had become a touchstone for the complex interplay of innovation, ethics, and humanity. Emily understood that the echoes of the past would continue to shape every new step forward. But armed with the lessons learned and the voices amplified, she believed the future could be forged with greater care and consciousness. The journey was ongoing, but the foundation had been laid. And in the echoes, Emily heard the persistent rhythm of hope. The public and private worlds had been forever changed by the revelations surrounding Nexus, but for Emily, the journey was approaching its most critical turning point. Years of relentless investigation, writing, and advocacy had brought the story from the shadows of secrecy into the full glare of public scrutiny. Yet, the question remained, what would come next? Would this moment lead to meaningful change or fade into another forgotten scandal? Emily found herself at the center of a movement demanding accountability and reform. After her latest series of articles detailing the long-term effects on volunteers and the deep ethical breaches within Nexus, lawmakers announced sweeping legislation aimed at regulating neural technology research. These new laws would require transparency, independent oversight, and robust protections for human subjects. The bill, known colloquially as the Neural Rights Act, represented a groundbreaking shift in how society approached emerging technologies. At a packed congressional hearing, Emily testified alongside scientists, ethicists, and affected volunteers. Her testimony was raw and compelling, drawing on years of first-hand reporting. "This is not just a story about technology," she told the committee. "It's about human lives, trust, and the kind of future we want to build. We cannot sacrifice our ethics for the sake of progress. We must ensure that innovation serves all of us, not just the powerful." The hearing was broadcast live, and the public response was overwhelming. Advocacy groups mobilized, media coverage intensified, and a wave of grassroots activism surged. Emily's work had become a catalyst, inspiring people across the country to demand that technology development be aligned with human values. But the turning point was not just about policy. It was deeply personal for Emily. As she reflected on her journey, she recognized how much she had changed. The young reporter who had started with a curious question had grown into a fierce advocate, committed to justice and truth. The risks she had taken, the friendships forged, and the challenges overcome had shaped her identity. Marcus Hayes, once a conflicted observer, had become a steadfast ally. Together, they planned a documentary project to further explore the human stories behind the headlines. Sarah remained a source of strength and perspective, reminding Emily to balance passion with self-care. Meanwhile, Musk had retreated from the public eye but continued to influence the conversation behind the scenes. Rumors of new ventures circulated, but the Nexus debacle had left an indelible mark on his legacy. Some saw him as a visionary who had stumbled, others as a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition. Emily's reporting now focused on the broader implications of neural technology. She explored how other countries were addressing ethical challenges, how companies were innovating responsibly, and how communities were asserting their rights in a digitized world. The story had expanded beyond Nexus, it was about humanity grappling with the promises and perils of the future. The turning point also brought moments of unexpected joy. At a conference on technology and ethics, Emily met Dr. Maya Patel, whose work had inspired so much hope. Their conversation was filled with mutual respect and a shared vision for a future where technology healed rather than harmed. As Emily prepared to publish her latest series, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The story she had pursued for years had sparked change, sparked debate, and sparked hope. Yet, she knew the work was far from over. The turning point was just that, a moment to pivot, reflect, and continue moving forward. In a final reflection, Emily wrote, "The path of progress is never straight. It is shaped by courage, accountability, and the relentless pursuit of truth. At this turning point, we stand together, ready to shape a future where technology uplifts humanity, honors our values, and respects the sacredness of the mind." Her words resonated widely, echoing the collective determination of a society awakening to the responsibilities of innovation. The turning point was real, tangible, and filled with promise. And for Emily, it was a testament to the power of one voice to illuminate the darkest corners and help chart a better way forward. The story that had started with a single question, what if technology could unlock the secrets of the mind, now reached its final chapter, but also its most profound beginning. Emily stood at the intersection of revelation and renewal, witnessing how the aftermath of Nexus had transformed not just a company or an industry, but the very way humanity viewed its future. The world was breaking forward into uncharted territory, shaped by lessons learned and hopes reborn. Emily's work had come full circle. From the first headline exposing Nexus's dangerous experiments to the latest series championing ethical innovation, she had chronicled a journey marked by hardship, courage, and relentless truth-seeking. Her articles had sparked legislation, public debate, and global conversations about the meaning and limits of neural technology. The impact was undeniable, but it was the human stories beneath the headlines that mattered most. In a quiet moment, Emily reflected on the volunteers who had risked everything, like Maya Collins and Sarah Mitchell. Their lives were forever changed, their voices now a beacon for accountability and compassion. Emily had formed bonds with these individuals, understanding that the cost of progress could never be measured solely in data or dollars. It was measured in human experience. The final piece in Emily's project was a documentary, co-created with Marcus Hayes. The film wove together interviews, footage from Nexus's rise and fall, and stories of healing and hope. It was a tribute to resilience and a call to action, a reminder that technology must be guided by ethics, empathy, and respect for human dignity. Months had passed since the documentary aired, and though the noise had settled, the spark of change it ignited showed no signs of fading. In cities and small towns across America, the conversation about the future of neural technology continued to grow. Not as a headline-driven frenzy, but as something more enduring, more grounded. Emily stood at the center of this cultural shift, not as a celebrity or activist, but as someone who had earned the public's trust by telling the truth, no matter the cost. She had returned to writing full-time, her voice now more influential than ever, but her focus had shifted. No longer just exposing corruption or chasing controversy, Emily now saw her mission as building bridges, between science and society, between ambition and responsibility, and above all, between people. She began a new column called The Human Future, featuring innovators, survivors, thinkers, and dreamers. One week, she would spotlight a neuroethicist working on mental privacy laws. The next, a former Nexus engineer who now led a nonprofit teaching tech literacy in underprivileged schools. These stories weren't always glamorous, but they were real. They were hopeful. They mattered. One morning, Emily received an email that made her pause. The subject line read, "I want to make things right." It was from Elon Musk. They hadn't spoken since her last series was published, and though he had remained mostly silent publicly, his private outreach to victims and communities had started to trickle into the news. She hesitated for a long moment before replying, then agreed to meet. Not for a feature, not for a confrontation, just a conversation. When they sat across from each other in a quiet conference room in Austin, Musk looked older than she remembered, more subdued. There was no showmanship, no bravado. Just a man who had seen the consequences of his own dreams. "I lost control of something that was never supposed to hurt people," he said, hands folded. "And I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want to understand, so I don't repeat it." Emily didn't respond right away. She watched him carefully, sensing both sincerity and the lingering tension of a man used to moving fast. "Understanding isn't enough," she finally said. "Listening is just the beginning. But rebuilding trust, that takes time. And honesty. And accountability." Musk nodded. "Then I'll start there." The conversation lasted hours. They talked about Nexus, the future of AI, mental sovereignty, and the ethical boundaries that innovation couldn't afford to cross. Emily didn't promise to write about him. She didn't offer absolution. But when they stood to leave, she said something she hadn't expected: "If you mean what you said, show us." Not with a press release. With action. In the weeks that followed, Emily learned that Musk had begun quietly funding independent neural ethics labs around the country, run by people who had once challenged him. It wasn't redemption, but it was a step. And the world was watching. Meanwhile, Emily was invited to speak at universities, scientific conferences, and tech summits, not as a celebrity journalist, but as a thoughtful voice bridging the gap between technological literacy and public awareness. She often began her talks with the same line, "I'm not here to stop progress. I'm here to ask, progress for who, and at what cost. One of her most meaningful moments came when she was invited to speak at a high school where a group of students had started their own ethics in tech club after watching the Nexus documentary. The students, many from immigrant families, some with dreams of becoming scientists, others activists, told her how her work had opened their eyes. "You made it feel like we had a voice in something that usually forgets about people like us," one girl said. Emily's throat tightened. It was the purest kind of reward. She stayed after the talk, listening to their ideas for apps that protected mental health, programs that taught digital ethics, and stories they wanted to tell. One boy said, "I want to be like you, but with code." She smiled and said, "Then make it count." Back home, Emily continued writing. Her latest piece, titled "The Spark That Never Dies," reflected on what had changed, and what still needed to. She wrote about the subtle dangers of forgetting too quickly, about how progress without memory was just repetition. But she also wrote about hope. About people like Maya Collins, who now led workshops for neural tech survivors. About Dr. Lila Morgan, who had helped draft the first global ethics charter for neurointerfaces. About everyday people demanding a seat at the table where the future was being built. Emily's words were no longer just a mirror to the past. They were a light pointing forward. The final paragraphs of her article read, "The story doesn't end with a scandal or a law passed or even a documentary seen around the world. The story lives on in every decision we make about what kind of world we want to live in." Neural tech, biotechnology, these aren't just fields for scientists and billionaires. They are human spaces. And every one of us has the right, and the responsibility, to shape them. Because the spark that drives innovation is powerful. But the spark that keeps us human. That's what keeps the fire burning. And with that, Emily closed her laptop, leaned back, and looked out the window of her apartment. The city below bustled with life, some people racing to work, others laughing over coffee, a child tugging on their mother's coat, pointing up at a drone overhead. The world hadn't slowed down. If anything, it was moving faster. But this time, maybe, just maybe, it was moving with more care. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time, not relief, not satisfaction, but something steadier, peace. The story would go on, as all stories do. But she had given it truth. She had given it heart. And now, it belonged to the people. And somewhere, deep in the collective consciousness of a world forever changed, a new beginning quietly sparked to life. It was almost surreal, the way life had settled into something resembling normal. For the first time in years, Emily could walk through a grocery store without checking over her shoulder, could sit in a cafe without overhearing whispers of Nexus, or find her name in the headlines. The world hadn't forgotten her, far from it, but it had finally moved from crisis to conversation. And in that space, something new was quietly unfolding. Not a story ending, but one beginning. Emily had moved out of the city. The chaos, while once fuel, had become noise. She rented a small cottage in the hills of Northern California, nestled between tall pines and rolling fog. Her mornings were slow now, coffee on the porch, her dog, Lumen, chasing birds in the yard, and notebooks scattered across the table. But despite the slower pace, her mind remained alive with questions. Not the kind that broke open scandals. The kind that built something. After the documentary, after the hearings, and after the spark of reform ignited a broader movement, Emily found herself drawn to something deeper. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about culture. About how entire generations were growing up interfacing with artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural devices, even before they fully understood what it meant to be human. And somewhere inside that realization, Emily felt a pull she couldn't ignore. So she began writing a book, not investigative, not exposé, but a hybrid of memoir and manifesto. It was called The Mind We Share, Stories from the Edge of Progress. In it, she explored the crossroads of innovation and identity, drawing not only from the Nexus experience but also from the voices that had emerged in its wake, children growing up with neuro-assistive devices, caregivers navigating the digital lives of loved ones, developers reckoning with the moral consequences of their code. Her approach wasn't didactic. It was intimate. Human. As she wrote, Emily returned to places she thought she'd left behind. She visited Sarah Mitchell again, now thriving as a speaker and advocate, helping others understand the psychological weight of neural experiments. Sarah had written a book too, The Mind Reclaimed, and their reunion was full of warmth and respect. "We went through hell," Sarah said one afternoon, sitting on a park bench overlooking a lake. "But somehow, it feels like we planted something there too. Like even in all that pain, something honest took root." Emily nodded, staring out at the water. "And maybe now, it's time to tend to what's growing." She also reconnected with Dr. Lila Morgan, who had taken a leadership role in the International Neuroethics Alliance. They met over tea in Geneva, where Emily was attending a summit on digital rights and human consciousness. "We used to think of the mind as private territory," Lila said, her eyes weary but bright. "But in a world where thoughts can be translated, tracked, maybe even hacked, we have to redefine what it means to be free. This isn't just a technological issue anymore. It's existential." That idea haunted Emily, in a good way. It reminded her that every new technology, no matter how advanced, eventually asks us the same question: who do we want to be? As the chapters of her book took shape, Emily also began guest lecturing at universities. Not just journalism students, but future engineers, policymakers, and psychologists. She opened her lectures with a familiar challenge: if you're building the future, ask yourself, what parts of the past are you carrying with you? And are they worth it? The room always grew quiet then. And that silence, she realized, wasn't hesitation. It was awareness. But it wasn't just public work that changed. Emily herself was changing. The intensity of the past years had carved deep lines in her, but also a strange sense of calm. She had faced fear, power, injustice, and loss, and she had come out not broken, but reshaped. Stronger. Softer, too. She began to see storytelling less as a weapon and more as a bridge. And for the first time, she wondered what it would be like to tell stories that weren't about damage, but about possibility. Late one evening, as rain tapped gently on the roof, Emily got a message from Maya Collins. They hadn't spoken in over a year. Maya, once a symbol of the unintended consequences of innovation, was now running a nonprofit dedicated to helping survivors of neurological experimentation. She had found her purpose in the ruins of her past. "I've been thinking," the message read. "What if we hosted a retreat? Not a conference. Something softer. A space for people who've lived through this, who've shaped it, who need healing, not headlines." Emily replied instantly, "Yes. Count me in." The retreat happened 3 months later in the mountains of Colorado. Just 30 people, scientists, survivors, ethicists, journalists, and developers, gathered in a wooden lodge with no agenda, no live streams, no press. Just dialogue, walks in the woods, and evenings by the fire. Emily led a session called "The Story That Keeps Us," where each person was invited to share the moment they realized the work they were doing wasn't just about machines, but about meaning. Tears were shed. Laughter rang out. New friendships were born. For Emily, it felt like the purest expression of everything she had fought for: not exposure, not applause, but connection. One night, as the fire cracked and snow fell softly outside, Maya turned to her and said, "This is the future, you know. Not the tech. This. Us, figuring it out together." And Emily believed her. Back home, she finished the final chapter of her book. The last lines read, "If the mind is the frontier of our time, then the heart must be its compass. We cannot build a future worth living in without listening, truly listening, to one another. That's the story we share. And that's where the next one begins." The book launched quietly but traveled far. Translated into 12 languages, adapted into podcasts and school curricula, it sparked the same quiet kind of revolution that had followed her earlier work. Not loud, not viral, just steady, human, and real. One morning, a letter arrived in her mailbox. No name. Just handwriting that read, "I don't trust technology. But I trust the way you tell its story. Thank you for making it make sense. For reminding us that we still have choices." Emily held the letter in her hands for a long time. Then she placed it in a wooden box where she kept a few keepsakes, a notebook from the Nexus trial days, a recording from Maya's first speech, and a copy of the whistleblower files that started it all. She stepped outside into the cool morning air, Lumen at her heels. The world was changing again. It always would be. But this time, it didn't feel out of control. It felt alive. And with the sun rising over the trees and the wind whispering through the leaves, Emily knew that the story hadn't ended. It had only just begun. The seasons changed slowly in the hills, golden autumn leaves giving way to gray skies and crisp mornings, then soft blankets of snow that turned the landscape into something clean, quiet, almost sacred. Emily had grown to love this rhythm. After years of chaos, scandal, and urgency, she finally understood the power of stillness. It didn't mean she was doing less. It meant she was thinking more clearly. With the book behind her and the retreat with Maya fresh in her mind, Emily turned her attention to something new. Not a new exposé. Not another documentary. But something she'd never done before, creating a platform. Not just for her voice, but for others like her. Writers. Whistleblowers. Innovators. Survivors. People who had something to say about the human impact of emerging technologies but didn't know where to say it. She called it The Long Light, a digital publication and podcast focused on ethics, healing, and hope at the frontier of science and society. The name came from something Maya had once said by the fire: "It's not the brightest flash that changes the world. It's the long light that stays with you. The kind that lets people see where they're going." Emily launched the project with a few friends and former colleagues who shared her vision. They built it slowly, intentionally. No ads. No clickbait. Just deeply reported stories, thoughtful essays, and conversations that challenged and inspired. Contributors included former tech employees who had walked away from toxic companies, ethicists trying to redefine digital citizenship, and everyday people whose lives had been touched, both uplifted and complicated, by AI and neurotech. The first episode of the podcast featured a conversation between Emily and Sarah Mitchell, revisiting everything they'd been through and how they found their way forward. They didn't rehash the trauma, they reflected on what came after. On rebuilding. On becoming something more than what was taken from them. Listeners responded with overwhelming gratitude. "This is the conversation I didn't know I needed," one person wrote. "It feels like someone finally turned the noise down." But even as the long light grew, Emily never lost sight of the real world beyond the stories. She continued mentoring students, consulting on ethics panels, and sitting with communities who felt left behind by the fast-moving future. She made it her mission to speak in places that Silicon Valley often ignored: rural towns, public schools, refugee centers, indigenous communities. And in every one of those rooms, she asked the same question: what does dignity look like in a digital world? The answers were never the same, but they always mattered. A teenage boy in Appalachia said, "Dignity is not being replaced by a machine." A mother in New Mexico said, "It's having control over what happens to your kid's brain." A veteran in Detroit said, "It's not being experimented on just because you're desperate." Emily collected these answers like precious stones, weaving them into the next phase of her work. Then, one winter night, as wind howled outside her window and Lumen slept curled at her feet, Emily got a message from Marcus Hayes. They hadn't collaborated in months. He had been off filming a new documentary in India about AI and agriculture, but he'd come across something that made him think of her. "There's a quiet movement happening," the message read. "Small labs. Rural communities. They're doing open source neurotech. Transparent. Affordable. Ground up. And nobody's covering it. Yet. Emily's heart sparked. It was exactly the kind of story she'd been waiting for, not a catastrophe, not a scandal, but a blueprint. A sign that people weren't just reacting to the past, but actively reshaping the future. Within 2 weeks, she was on the road again, this time to rural Iowa, where a cooperative of farmers and engineers had developed a neural feedback system that helped monitor stress in livestock. It wasn't flashy, but it was sustainable, open to community oversight, and designed with care. "We're not trying to be billionaires," one farmer told her. "We're just trying to take care of what we've got, better." From there, Emily traveled to a reservation in South Dakota where a group of young native technologists had adapted neural devices to preserve oral history, allowing elders to encode memories and stories in new ways for future generations. "This is our data sovereignty," one young woman said. "Our way of making sure our past doesn't get lost in someone else's algorithm." Emily was in awe. Not just at the innovation, but at the intention behind it. These were the real frontiers, not in labs funded by trillion-dollar companies, but in communities that had every reason to distrust technology, yet chose to meet it on their own terms. When she returned home, Emily spent days writing, revising, and reworking the article that would become "The Future is Rural," how the next tech revolution might just start off the grid. It was her most widely read piece yet. Not because it was explosive, but because it was real. Because it offered something people were starving for, hope that wasn't naive. Innovation that wasn't exploitative. That spring, the Long Light received funding from a nonpartisan civic trust focused on media integrity and public education. With that support, Emily expanded the team, launched fellowships for young storytellers, and opened up new channels in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Lakota. It was never about scale. It was about reach. About meeting people where they were, in the languages they lived in. Emily's work had become something more than reporting, it had become accompaniment. A kind of journalism that didn't just shine a light on what was wrong, but walked alongside what was becoming right. One quiet morning, standing on her porch with a mug of tea, Emily looked out over the trees and thought about the arc of the last several years. From that first explosive report about Nexus, to the trials, the reforms, the reckoning, and now, this slow, steady forward motion. She didn't see herself as a hero. Just someone who kept asking the right questions, even when the answers hurt. And she wasn't done. The spark hadn't dimmed. It had just changed form, less like fire, more like a lantern. Something you carry when the road ahead is long. Something you pass to others when their hands are trembling in the dark. As the wind whispered through the pines, she whispered something to herself, something that had become a quiet mantra: tell the truth. Hold the light. Make it human. And with that, she sat back down at her desk, opened a new document, and began the next story. Because the long light was still burning. The phrase had first been said in jest, legacy mode, by a young coder Emily met during a community tech roundtable in Oakland. They were discussing the pace of change in AI and neurotech, and someone asked what it felt like to have started writing about all this before the explosion of global regulation, grassroots movements, and the widespread integration of brain-computer interfaces. The coder laughed and said, "Emily's in legacy mode. That's not an insult, it's a position of power. She's the archive and the blueprint." It stuck with her. Legacy mode. At first, it sounded like something dated, like an obsolete setting on an old operating system. But the more Emily sat with it, the more it made sense. Legacy wasn't about what was over. It was about what remained. What endured. And as she continued shaping the long light into something lasting, something that could survive long after she stepped away from the front lines, she realized that the word fit. She wasn't chasing headlines anymore, she was building a foundation. And people had noticed. In June, she received an invitation to give the closing keynote at the inaugural Global Forum on Human Tech Futures, hosted by UNESCO and attended by leaders from over 70 nations. The event's goal was to unify standards around neurotech, AI, and emerging digital rights. Her speech would follow talks by scientists, lawmakers, and cultural historians. But it was her story, and her framing, that the organizers hoped would bring it all together. The weeks leading up to the forum were intense. Not because Emily was nervous, but because she felt the weight of what had to be said. Everyone else would talk about frameworks and models, projections and laws. But she needed to speak from the place that had always guided her, the human place. She traveled to Paris for the event, staying in a quiet apartment not far from the river. The city was buzzing with energy. Activists, technologists, and journalists from every continent mingled in conference halls and cafes. And yet, despite the global scale, the conversations still circled around the same questions: who gets to design the future? Who gets left out? How do we honor the complexity of the human spirit in a world of data and code? On the day of her keynote, Emily walked onto the main stage, lights low, crowd silent. A single spotlight framed her figure. Simple black dress, no teleprompter, just a small notebook in her hand. She began not with facts, but with a story. I once interviewed a woman who had been one of the first to undergo unauthorized neural modification through a startup program that promised to cure anxiety. What she got instead was a year of disorientation, intrusive thoughts, and legal silence. When I asked her how she recovered, she said something I've never forgotten: I had to reclaim my mind, piece by piece. Like rebuilding a home I didn't know someone had gutted while I was sleeping. Emily paused, letting that settle. We talk a lot about innovation, she continued, but not nearly enough about the aftermath of innovation. The part where we have to live with what we made. Not just technically, but morally, emotionally, intergenerationally. Over the next 40 minutes, Emily told the story of Nexus, of Maya, of Sarah, of the tech workers who walked away, of the students who started their own digital rights movements, of the tribes coding in their native tongues, of the rural labs building tools from the ground up. She didn't lecture. She wove. Each thread connecting back to a simple, powerful idea: we are not passengers on the journey of progress. We are its authors. She ended with a quote from the very first article she ever published on Nexus, years ago: what if the most dangerous thing about innovation isn't what it does, but what it forgets? And then she added, softly, let us not forget. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was something deeper. Lasting. A room filled with people who weren't just impressed, but moved. People who had been reminded why they got into this work in the first place. Emily left the stage with a sense of completion. Not finality. Completion. She had said what needed to be said. And now, others could carry it forward. Back home, the world kept moving. Technology didn't slow down. But it did begin to move more carefully in some corners. After the forum, several countries signed on to a shared neuroethical pact, a non-binding agreement, but symbolically powerful. Grassroots groups expanded their reach. New guidelines were introduced into public school curriculums, teaching students not only how to use AI, but how to question it. Emily's role shifted again. She handed off editorial leadership of the Long Light to a younger team and became its senior advisor. She focused more on teaching, mentoring, and consulting with communities that wanted to start their own storytelling hubs. It's not about my voice anymore, she told them. It's about yours. It always has been. She also started something entirely unexpected, a fiction series. Set in a near future where memories could be transferred like digital files, the stories weren't dystopian or utopian. They were deeply human. About grief, love, memory, identity. She called the series Archives of the Unspoken. It was her way of exploring the emotional truths behind the science, the things that couldn't fit neatly into journalism or policy. Surprisingly, the fiction resonated as much as her reporting had. Readers wrote in saying the stories helped them process things they hadn't known how to articulate. "I never realized I was afraid of losing my memories until I read this," one person wrote. "Now I want to talk to my kids about how we remember. What we choose to keep. What we let go." And that, Emily realized, was her legacy. Not just the headlines. Not the awards or accolades. But the way her words lived in people's lives. The conversations she started that kept going, long after the ink dried. One evening, years after the Nexus scandal, Emily walked through a university campus where she was scheduled to give a guest lecture. She passed a group of students sitting under a tree, deep in discussion. One of them held a copy of The Mind We Share. They didn't notice her. She didn't interrupt. She just smiled and kept walking. That moment meant everything. In her journal later that night, she wrote, "I don't need the story to be about me. I just want to know the story keeps going. That somewhere, someone is asking a hard question, or listening a little deeper, or imagining a better way, because of something I helped uncover. That's legacy mode. Not the spotlight. The echo." As she sat by the window, sipping tea and listening to the sound of wind moving through the trees, she felt the peace of a life well used. Not perfect. But purposeful. And as the stars emerged in the quiet night sky, Emily knew one thing for certain: the long light would keep burning. Not because she carried it alone, but because she'd passed it on. And the world, still unfinished, was in good hands. Public response to the documentary was overwhelming. Screenings across the country sparked community dialogues, school discussions, and policy forums. The story of Nexus became a teaching moment, a collective reckoning that refused to be forgotten. Emily received messages from viewers sharing how the story had changed their perspectives, inspired advocacy, or brought comfort to those affected. Meanwhile, the industry itself was evolving. New companies embraced transparent research models and prioritized participant welfare. International coalitions formed to establish shared ethical standards. Neural technology was still advancing, but now with a conscience, grounded in the lessons of the past. Emily knew the journey was far from over. New questions would arise as technology advanced: how to protect mental privacy, how to ensure equitable access, how to guard against new forms of manipulation. But the foundations were stronger. The public was informed, engaged, and empowered to shape the future. As the world broke forward, Emily found peace in knowing that her voice, and the voices she had helped amplify, had contributed to a safer, more just path. She was proud, humbled, and ready for whatever came next. In her closing article, Emily wrote, "Breaking forward means embracing the unknown with courage, guided by the wisdom of our shared humanity. It means recognizing that every innovation carries responsibility, and that progress is not just about what we can do, but what we should do. Our story is still being written, but now, we hold the pen." The story of Nexus, and of Emily's pursuit of truth, was a testament to the power of storytelling to change the world. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and integrity could light the way. And so, as technology continued to evolve, humanity moved forward, breaking barriers, breaking molds, and most importantly, breaking forward. The world hadn't slowed. If anything, it had become more complex, more connected, and more chaotic in places Emily could never have predicted. But there was a difference now. Conversations that once happened behind closed doors were taking place in classrooms, town halls, and open forums. What had once been considered fringe or idealistic had become foundational. Tech without ethics was no longer an option. The seeds she and others had planted, through truth, pain, courage, and curiosity, had taken root. And every now and then, she got to witness what bloomed. It was late spring. Emily had been invited to speak at a youth-led summit called Tomorrow's Blueprint, held in Denver and organized entirely by students under 25. It wasn't backed by corporations or government initiatives. It was crowd-funded, community-led, and brimming with purpose. Emily arrived without expectations. She had spoken at so many events over the years, but this one felt different. The energy wasn't performative. It was real. Intentional. These weren't kids looking for approval, they were already building the future they wanted to live in. Her panel was scheduled for the final day. The topic, memory, identity, and the new frontier of consciousness. It wasn't the first time she had spoken about this subject, but it was the first time the audience was entirely made up of people born after the Nexus revelations. These were digital natives in the deepest sense, raised in a world where privacy had always been a negotiation, where AI companions were normal, and where neural tools were as common as smartphones once were. And yet, they were not numb. They were more awake than she could have hoped. Before her panel, Emily wandered through the summit grounds. In one corner, students were demonstrating open-source mental health bots developed with consent-first coding principles. In another, teens were hosting a live storytelling booth called Upload Me Gently, where people could share memories they never wanted technology to touch. One booth displayed a wall titled Our Line in the Code, dozens of handwritten notes from young engineers listing what they refused to build, no matter the paycheck. Emily stood there for a long time. When her turn to speak came, she took the stage and looked out at a crowd of bright, questioning faces. She didn't bring a speech. She didn't need one. She spoke from the place where everything in her life had come full circle. You don't remember a world before Nexus. Before we asked whether thoughts could be read, feelings tracked, or memory sold. And maybe that's a gift. Because you're not burdened by nostalgia for a simpler time. You're grounded in now. And what I see here, today, is not fear. It's courage. She told them about her early career, the whistleblowers, the lawsuits, the silence that came before the noise. But she also told them about the retreats, the fiction, the letters from strangers, the quiet shifts in policy that no one celebrated but mattered all the same. And then she said, we used to believe the biggest question was what can we build? But the better question was always what are we willing to live with? You're the first generation that gets to ask that question from the start. Don't waste it. After her panel, she was swarmed by students, not for selfies or signatures, but for conversation. They didn't want to idolize her. They wanted to work with her. Learn from her. Push past what she'd already done. And she welcomed it. Every question. Every challenge. Every wild new idea. Later that evening, as the summit closed with an open mic under the stars, one student read a poem inspired by Emily's writing. It ended with the line, our minds are not code to be cracked, but constellations, meant to be honored. Emily wiped her eyes. Not from sadness, but from something rare and precious, the feeling of being truly understood. Back home, she received dozens of emails from students she met at the summit. Some wanted internships with the long light. Others asked for mentorship, guidance on ethics statements, or help getting their projects seen by the public. Emily responded to every one. Slowly, personally. Not with answers, but with questions. The same ones she had once asked herself, why this story? Who is it for? What harm could it cause? What healing might it offer? And then, quietly, she began a new project. It was something she hadn't spoken about yet, not to her editors, not to the press. Just a file on her desktop, titled simply, First Light. It was a multimedia archive, a living collection of stories, audio logs, letters, visuals, and field reports from people all over the world responding to the new frontiers of technology through the lens of ethics, emotion, and lived experience. Not theory. Not speculation. Real lives. Real choices. Real futures. Her goal wasn't to predict what would come next. It was to preserve how we felt as we moved through it. The idea for First Light came from something a grandmother in rural Oregon had once told her after a small town hall, I don't understand all this tech stuff. But I know stories. I know what gets passed down and what gets lost. Make sure we don't forget the feeling of being human in all this. That became the mission. To create a time capsule of awareness. To give people, now and later, a place to remember not just what we built, but how it shaped us. Emily partnered with librarians, cultural anthropologists, neuropsychologists, and youth curators. The archive would be open source, multilingual, and community managed. It wasn't just hers. It was everyone's. As submissions began pouring in, from all continents, in all formats, Emily was overwhelmed with gratitude. An Afghan girl submitted a voice recording about how her neural language tool helped her grandmother remember lullabies. A Ghanaian coder wrote an essay on designing with ancestral respect. A teenager in Texas submitted a comic about AI and the soul. A blind poet in Tokyo shared a braille-to-thought transcription of their latest work, made possible by a local neurotech lab. This was what progress could be. Not just innovation, but inclusion. Not just data, but depth. As the archive grew, so did the sense that Emily had come to the end of one road, not out of exhaustion, but because the path ahead no longer needed her to walk it alone. Her voice had started something. Now, others were speaking. And she was listening. On a warm June morning, standing on the same porch where so many stories had begun, Emily looked out at the trees and the wide, open sky. Lumen, now older, rested beside her feet. A notification pinged quietly on her phone, First Light Archive, 1,000 stories uploaded. She smiled. Then, she picked up her pen, not to write another exposé or book or speech. But to begin a letter. Not for publication. For herself. A letter to the future. If you're reading this, you probably don't remember me. That's okay. I was never the point. I just wanted you to know that once, there were people who fought not for machines, but for meaning. Who believed that the heart should guide the hand. That every line of code carried a prayer or a warning. That stories mattered. That memory was sacred. And that the future was never a product. It was a promise. Keep it. Shape it. Light it. She folded the page, placed it in an envelope, and slipped it into the box marked Archive, Personal. And then she went inside. Tomorrow was coming. And it looked beautiful. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?